Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Waby Saby episode. Coach Jamie is here. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very well. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was really nice.
All
No,
right.
we did a lot of eating.
Okay, well, today we are going to talk about a topic that always comes up, which is sleep hygiene. And for those of you tuning in here, if you don't know what that is, I think most probably people who hear this probably know what it is. But if you don't, you will know that you actually know what it is in about a second. We are going to talk about sleep hygiene, sort of like what is it, and we're going to look at that's going to be first thing. Then we're going to look at like why it can be tricky, or the ideas behind it can be tricky, and then why, in a kind of like interesting plot twist, we're going to say that actually it can be quite nice to have a routine, but at the same time we've talked about how sleep hygiene can be tricky. So it's going to be, I think, a really interesting episode. But let's start at the beginning. What is sleep hygiene?
Oh, okay. Am I supposed to answer
Yes,
that?
that's for
Sleep
you. That's
hygiene.
for
Yeah,
you.
sleep hygiene. It's basically a laundry list of do's and don'ts. What to do and what not to do in order to get better sleep. And it can be certain things like most commonly, and mostly you probably heard this from your doctor, because most physicians I know, we don't as and I am a pediatrician, so we I didn't get any training around behavioral sleep interventions. But I used to, when parents ask for sleep advice, my I would give them a printout of like these do's and don'ts for sleep, and basically it's list for sleep hygiene. So commonly it'd be avoiding caffeine, right? Or anything, beverages that have caffeine. Maybe exercise during the day can help, but then not to do it too close to sleep, or not too close to bedtime, I should say. Steering clear from types of food, like heavy meals, maybe right before bedtime, maybe avoid that. Also, getting natural light during the day, but then making sure your room is dark enough at bedtime. And then other things would be maybe making sure the room temperature is at ambient temperature for bedtime. So those are some of the things I can come up with. Do you have other things that you can think of that can be part of that blanket term,
Yeah, there
sleep
was one more
hygiene? Yeah.
thing I thought of, that is like avoid screens, not like avoid screens close
Oh
to bedtime.
yes,
That's a big one.
definitely, especially around with kids, right? And teenagers, because they're always glued to their phone. So yeah.
But yeah,
Um,
I think the point here is again that this list of things, which is like, don't eat this, maybe eat this, do this, don't do that, avoid this, but don't, like, that is sleep hygiene. So basically a list of do's and don'ts, and there's an implied message here that if you do or don't do these things, that will promote sleep, which segues nicely into point number two. When can sleep hygiene be tricky? What do you say to this?
okay, so I know I want to start by, like, firstly, if you're doing this with the intent of making yourself fall asleep faster, or maybe getting more hours of sleep, then it can be tricky, right? Because we know, at least when you are pressured to, sleep or to produce sleep, then the less of it you get. So I think the tricky part is when you're doing this in an effort to get more sleep, then it can backfire, and it could definitely have more and then when it doesn't work, then you have more anxiety around, not being able to fall asleep, and then it can get spiral because, oh well, my doctor told me to do these things and now it's not working, and then you become more stressed out and therefore hyper aroused and not able to fall asleep. So I think that's when it becomes tricky.
Absolutely. And now this leads to kind of two natural follow-up questions. Let's start with one of them, which was, okay, how about from a parent perspective? Because again, this is
Mhm.
this is Waby Saby here. We're talking about like parents who have kids and there's been a struggle with sleep. Would you say anything that is different or similar when it comes to like from a parent perspective?
So I would say, so we want to say that, insomnia for adults is different, right? So insomnia is when you're become fearful or afraid of being sleepless, of not getting enough sleep, right? For kids, I would say kids 10 years or younger, that doesn't really happen, right? They're not anxious about losing sleep. In fact, the one thing they are anxious about is separating from their parents at night. So I think that's mostly what they're afraid of. Oh, now it's bedtime. I think now my mom or dad, they're gonna have to leave me alone in my bedroom. And that's what's scary for them. It's not the idea that I'm not gonna be able to fall asleep and therefore tomorrow it affects my day. I don't They always live in the moment, so they're not really thinking so much of what's gonna happen the next day. And so I would say, from a parent perspective, um, I would say, yeah, you should. I think it's helpful to build routine, and then that gives them like the brain likes to make associations, right? So building a good routine leading up to bedtime is great because then if say if you do like bath time and then brushing your teeth and then reading, it can tell the kid's brain that okay, now it's leading up to bedtime. So I think it can be helpful, but the tricky part is when the parent are enforcing these things again in order for them to fall asleep. Like if you're wanting it so bad, and then it can backfire again for the kid because then the kid, instead of experiencing a positive having a positive time or like experience with your mom or your dad, they can feel that pressure that, oh, my mom and dad want me to fall asleep now, and then it can backfire. So then they get very, very hyper aroused and then they're not able to fall asleep.
Very nicely said. So I think summarizing this, like anything can become an effort to control sleep, and when we try to control sleep, actually, we become stressed, hyperaroused, etc., and we sleep less. And it was just one other kind of follow question that came up, which was interesting because you said like maybe this is more with the adult perspective in mind, but when we do sleep hygiene in an intent, that kind of effort to sleep, it becomes tricky, and then the question becomes so when else, like what other when else do you do sleep hygiene, right? Or something to that effect. Is there any other reason to do it? Something like that. What do you think when you hear that?
Is there any other, well, for adults you mean, or for
You
us
can say
parents?
both, actually, whatever you feel like answering.
Yeah, I would say, I think for adults, like we, as parents, I mean, I definitely stick to bedtime routines for my kids. I like them to be in bed by 9. So that means like I would have to start the whole thing, the process of bath, brushing, eating. They like to eat oatmeal right before bedtime, and then reading a chapter from a book maybe before lights out. And so, uh, and then the reason, but for me, then the intent, and I was guilty too of doing all of that for like making sure that they fall asleep, but it actually shifted to ensuring that there's regular bedtime routine in order to create that nice time you have really as working parents. We're working 8 to 5, and then you pick them up maybe, or sometimes you pick them after school, and then there's a lot of after school activity. So the real nice quiet time you have with them is that time, that hour leading up to bedtime. And so to me, I like it because then it creates that parent child interaction that's positive. And then that, of course, dials down the maybe hyper arousal, some of the stress that they've maybe felt throughout the day. And so feeling warm and safe next to mom and dad, and that dials down the hyper arousal and therefore gets them ready to fall asleep. So I
Yeah, well,
think,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
very nicely said. And again, again, there's no intent whatsoever to make sleep happen. And as a nice side effect, sleep might actually happen. And now, for anybody tuning in here who's kind of pondering, like, I'm doing these things, but maybe it's because I like it and we like it as a routine, like you described, or maybe I have some sleep, like I am producing some pressure. I'm not sure what my intent is. How can we know? How do we know if like sleep hygiene has become this effort to control sleep, this intent, or not? Any tips or thoughts on that?
I know, like, I think if you're constantly watching your watch, like after, like, say, lights out, um, and you're like, okay, she sleep yet? She sleep yet? And then that's one thing to know, that if you are like watching out for that outcome of falling asleep, then that's probably a sign that you're doing these things with the hope of, you know, having your child fall asleep faster. And another thing would be when it doesn't work, right? When it feels like you are so stressed out, right? Okay, my doctor told me no screens. I put all the iPads, the phone outside. All right, the doctor told me give them all those blackout blinds that they put in the windows. That way, it's pitch dark in the bedroom, and maybe three books, short books that you read, and it's still not working. That's because without you, oh yes, so it didn't work. Yeah, so without you noticing, you are highly stressed out, anxious about everything, getting that all the routine right, but then not being stressed out about your child not falling asleep. And so that although they don't understand, they can feel the stress, and therefore it also heightens their stress level. Yeah.
No, well said. Yeah, to me, I think of it very much as kind of that last thing you said. Like, if we look back upon something and evaluate it, like it worked or it didn't work. Either way, actually, there we can see that we had that intent to kind of try to produce the result. So I think that could
Hmm.
be something to really look at. And we've actually already, you actually already covered this, like why a routine can be nice. And I just wrote down that, evening can become a time to like connect and bond with your kids. And that routine can leading up to that bonding time, making the bonding time sort of routine. Like, you just can create a nice habit that can create, that can lead to what
Definitely.
we want to help people with finding, which is like peaceful nights at home, right?
Yeah, I think I like to talk, to parents about like doing things, maybe shifting why you do certain things, like in terms of valuing positive interaction rather than the number of minutes it takes for your child to fall asleep. If you kind of shift that thinking just a little bit, and then good sleep just becomes a byproduct, right? So if we're kind of, uh, I know you don't like making goals, but if your North Star would be, how can I make positive interactions between my child, uh, you know, or how can I create more positive interactions with my child, that that time leading up to bedtime. And so, like, I think falling asleep much faster can become a great byproduct of that.
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Very, very nice thing. Before we finish up here, I want to throw you a curveball. No, just kidding. But I want to show you something that I just, before this episode, we were like, is there evidence to support this? Like that sleep hygiene doesn't really have an impact in terms of like those outcomes, like, falling asleep faster and things like that. And I found this super interesting article
Oh, nice.
from
Okay.
Yama from July of this year, actually pretty recent. And this is actually a pretty large study. They had like 519 parent-child dyads. So yeah, a pretty big study where they randomized kids to, or these, I think it was randomized to education. Yeah, it was randomized to some education or no education. And basically, long story short, um, there was no impact. There was no impact on like how long the kids slept, and there was also no impact on like parental beliefs or their sense of like how much they were frustrated by this. etc. And this was quite rigorous education. And yeah, so I just want to say very briefly to people tuning in that I think what we say here, that sleep hygiene has no actual impact in terms of like it doesn't control sleep in any way. I think there's a lot of evidence for that, but we should do a real like journal club on this because it's fascinating. The conclusion, like, spoiler alert here, but their conclusion is basically like this didn't work, but we have to we have to do more. We have to do more education on a completely earlier and more of it, and like very, very interesting. So what do you say we do a journal club soon?
Oh yeah, that would be fun, I think.
Right.
Yeah. And like
Okay.
I like poring over evidence. Yeah.
All right, so something to look forward to. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll conclude there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye guys.
Bye bye.